Today on the ThriveMore podcast, I had the opportunity to interview Alex Oswiecinski. Alex is the ultimate entrepreneur because he was in a business that had a pain point. He was experiencing a pain point around lead generation in a business that he worked for. And so instead of being frustrated, instead of saying, well, that's the way it is, he actually started a company that solved that pain point, which is exactly what great entrepreneurs do. They find an unmet need and they fulfill that need by building a company that specializes in that. He's also going to talk about in the podcast how when he gets an uneasy feeling or he gets this unsettled feeling, how he dissects that and projects himself forward in his business to identify where the breaking point is going to be, where the weak link will be in the future, not today. And I think that's a gift that entrepreneurs have if we listen to that feeling that we get. So enjoy this podcast. Listen to what Alex has to say. I know you will learn from it, and I'm sure you're going to enjoy it. I have an awesome guest on today. Alex Oswiecinski is a guy that you are going to learn a lot from because, like every great business, a great entrepreneur, the business was started because he or she was solving a problem, a pain point that they had. And you're going to see that Alex's story is no different, which makes it all the much more genuine and exciting to hear. Alex was a former food service and franchise industry executive. So he founded Prospect Direct really in direct relation to creating a better lead source. And he's turned this into really the fastest growing lead gen company in the world. He has served over 100,000 unique leads to hundreds of global and regional franchise brands since 2018, which is leading to over 1,500 deals being closed. So join me in welcoming Alex to the ThriveMore podcast. How you doing, brother?
Roger, thanks, man. Appreciate the intro. Very nice, and look forward to getting this going. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think what's most enjoyable to the audience is to really understand your background, right? Really understand kind of how we got here to this podcast, and so much more importantly is what was that journey like to get here? So if you can take us back in time, kind of talk about what you were doing, how you were earning your living and how that led to founding Prospect Direct. I think that'd be really interesting.
Sure. Yeah. I won't take it too early in my career too much, but just know that my background wasn't in marketing at all.
Okay.
I was actually a supply chain person from out of school, more in analytical type roles. Moved to Dallas in 2006 and worked at TGI Fridays and was on the purchasing side of that business. So was a food buyer, really got into the understanding how scaled restaurant brands operate.
Were you in food service at all before that? Did I miss that?
As a busboy and as a bartender in college.
Sure.
So technically, yeah, but just in single units and stuff like that. I hadn't worked for like chains or anything.
Okay. So we moved to Dallas. That's a big move. And we get to Dallas and tell me what happens.
It was tough for the first year, just adjusting to being a buyer and everything like that. But made it. And then the big leap I made there was over to the international side, which kind of comes part in my entrepreneurial journey later on. But I went to about 55 or 60 countries with TGI Fridays all over the world. And they hadn't really organized a supply chain program internationally. So that was really a exciting new thing that I got to pilot there, and also scratch the itch of like international travel, which I didn't have to wait till later in life to get under my belt. The big next leap was I'd met the founder of Which before at like a conference, just a mutual supplier. And he gave me a call and said, like, hey, we're signing our first international country. And my brother's doing this and we haven't really had experience internationally. Would you be interested in like, so we talked and I came aboard and helped set up the like back end, like the store development and the supply chain and everything for their first international market. And a couple of years later at I took over the development side as well.
For the audience, so in franchising, the development side would be selling franchise licenses, awarding franchise licenses to prospective franchisee prospects. So really kind of a high ticket sales position.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And honestly, like what you just explained, that probably would have like given me a lesson at that point. Like I knew, even though I'd been in franchising, I knew so little about the signing of franchisees and how that the process works. And it's really an interesting, as you know, it's like they want to get in on a great brand. You want great franchisees. So you're kind of courting them, but you're also like the police. You're like, we don't want to let in bad. So it's a very interesting business dynamic that doesn't usually there's an obvious seller and a buyer in a transaction. In this case, it's kind of like a mutual courting.
Never heard it that explained that way, but you're dead on. And both sides are evaluating each other very, very carefully because it's a 10-year marriage with two, 10-year renewals, quite frankly. So it's critical. Yeah. So walk me through, like, you get into this position, didn't have a whole lot of experience in that, didn't have a marketing background. It's not an easy position, franchise development.
Yeah. Well, luckily, I mean, it was a very entrepreneurial, flexible environment that was created. So the brand was like really on an upswing. When I joined, they had about 120 units. And by the time I even, 2 years later, they had over like 200, and they had doubled pretty much in like 2 years. So I was learning from watching the domestic side. Actually, Connie, who is our head of development for Prospect Direct, she was domestically, she closed like over 100 deals in 1 year. Like I witnessed these discovery days and coming, and like, so I actually learned a lot from her at that point, and about like Jeff, the Vickers, the VP there, and essentially learned about like franchise disclosure documents. Of course, for international, it's a master agreement that kind of like layers above the domestic.
Yep.
So from our attorney, like franchise attorneys, like I would talk to them a lot and learn from them. And just kind of like reverse engineered all the lessons into like a year or two. I would say, one of the big breakthroughs I had was in how to find the candidates was first, like I was going to having our suppliers introduce me to existing franchisees in these markets. Like, hey,
and we're talking about international markets at this time?
International markets.
Yeah. Okay. All right.
So unlike domestic, international, you really want to find existing strong operators, or at least people who have some sort of substantial development, usually. And, but that hit a ceiling as well, right? Like I'd get introduced and maybe there was a fit. I would say, this is where the root of like what Prospect Direct became, was me just hunting on LinkedIn for these type of people and directly messaging them. And I couldn't believe that like I didn't need a third party to introduce me to these multi-millionaires that at that time, like to me, they were a little intimidating, like business people.
Sure.
And yet I would just, as long as I positioned, truthfully what we were, which was like a disruptor to Subway in these markets, I would have their attention and get on a call with them and they'd consider it. And I had some like, 100 millionaires flying into Dallas for this brand that like wasn't really known internationally. So I learned the power of direct message and authenticity in messaging, and which eventually became like copywriting for us now. So
yeah. Did you target a specific country to start with? Like, is there? I've not gone internationally yet with a franchise brand. So, is there a way to do that?
Yeah, you definitely. We had a priority list of countries. So, like, we had like, Mexico. We had just signed in, like Canada. We had on the list, but then I kept dropping it off just due to different reasons because it was already highly competitive up there. We wanted to plant a seed in like the Middle East, so like UAE, and then the UK was target. So we had different strategic target countries that would like seed different geographic regions.
Yeah.
And then other countries that were just like very US friendly, or where Subway was just dominating and there was no second competitor.
Yeah. Makes sense. All right. So walk me, if you can, kind of walk me through that journey. Because is it that journey that then brings you to Prospect Direct?
Yeah. So, I didn't think I was creating a company or anything like that. I was really just like, well, how do I accelerate this so that I have like I wanted to have competition in these markets. I wanted to have like 2 or 3 horse races when I was focusing on a country, not just be. So I met with who my co-founder ended up being, who was like a database programmer at American Airlines. And he was just like a mutual friend. And I learned, okay, if you can gather audiences and targeted audiences and use email, you can basically reach out to more people more often and customize. And it just kind of like freed the constraints of LinkedIn. And that was really the journey of like learning the power of data and audiences and targeting and everything. Which back then, I guess, seems like, it's table stakes now for even a non-marketer to understand all that. But back then, like doing ads on Facebook was just coming about. Like this was like 2014, 15.
Oh yeah.
And
Wild West back then. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember going to this conference in Sweden, and the last slide was just data. And I was like, how can they end this whole like advanced conference on just one word? And I was like, I know my business skills are lacking in IT and marketing, and that's where the future disruption is happening in business. So,
yeah. Wow. So it sounds like that convention, that seminar was almost a pivotal moment.
It was, yeah. It kind of reinforced that I was onto something with how I was reaching out to people, but that the future was everybody was going to catch up on this, and these channels were going to get saturated and how do you stay ahead of that with business intelligence and data and things like that, and just always be some steps ahead.
Yeah.
And that's where I was like, well, just building skills, like understand how I don't need to program, but I need to understand how database and database relationships work, understand how like programmatic ads and targeting and like CPMs, all these things were going to be like table stakes for a business person. Even if you hire an agency, you can just burn a lot of money on an agency if you don't know how to limit and direct what they're doing. So
you're so right. If you want to end up with a small fortune, start with a large one and not know what you're trying to outsource, because they will burn through money, because no one's going to care about your business as much as you do, ever.
Yep, exactly.
So you leave this conference, you are knowing that there's got to be a better way, a scalable way. So kind of walk us on that journey from there to deciding I'm going to build a business.
I was meeting in a coffee shop in the evenings, like 1 to 2 days a week over a period of 2 years. And the idea initially was to create a data company and to sell like segmented lists, because I didn't even understand what lead generation was, because I never like hired one. And I was like, well, data is going to be like the raw material that's the constraint. So that's what we created, was just like a giant database and a way to segment the lists. And it was like, choose your own audience and buy it. And basically Hamid was like setting up this system so that people could just buy it. And I'm like, okay, if we set this up, we could have like, kind of a passive income shop for data type of thing.
Yeah.
And when I left Which, that's what we were starting with. And I had sold a couple like 5-figure deals to some customers to get some traction. But I underestimated how hard the selling process of selling data is, and that people want samples, and then it's not quite right. And if your data is 97% right, they can still critique it. And then how far do you prompt? Like there's a lot to selling. Like it's a wild west a little bit. And with that, it's extremely high margin, extremely like tantalizing, but it's also like, if you don't really know what you're doing, you'll have a few people that you satisfy, but scaling it is actually harder on the sales side than I thought. Lead generation ended up being a happy medium where we can use data and combine it with words and copy and create an end product that a salesperson could use.
Yep.
Data was what marketers can use. So we were actually selling to marketers. And I didn't learn this lesson until like a year after starting the company. That like, on one hand, you're selling to marketers, but marketers are used to, with an agency, using that data. On the other hand, when you're selling a lead, you're selling to a salesperson, and they know exactly what to do with it and pop it into CRM and follow up. So I'm not getting like too nuanced into that. Like that's essentially
it's fascinating. Yeah,
where we became. Yeah.
So maybe for the audience as well, kind of talk about, I mean, I gave the intro, which is great, but talk about Prospect Direct and why it's, because I really think it's kind of a great vendor partner to have in the franchising business. It's one that, we use personally here at ThriveMore Brands for two of our brands, Rockbox and Beam. But I know you have many, many other customers, and there's a reason. It's because you have high quality lead sources. You have high quality lead sources. So if you can, just for the audience, kind of strip it back and say exactly what Prospect Direct is and what it does, and then how the companies that work with you and buy your services, how they benefit.
Yeah, appreciate you, like, your guys' loyalty to using us and everything like that. We really, we are also, like, somewhat selective with the brands we take on and everything, because a lot of it is we are authentically going out on behalf of the brand, and we're not using kind of like gimmicky marketing. It's an authentic message primarily through email, and therefore, the more substantial the brand is, usually they fall into like a couple different buckets. It's like they're like a legendary status type brand, and we can hang a hat on like a 30-year history of proven, or they're like a disruptor in like a newer space, and there's like blue ocean opportunity for franchisees in new markets. I would say you guys fall into more of that blue ocean disruptor. And with that, when you're doing things right and like your website's good and everything, our system really works well, because what we're doing is we're reaching out to people that are highly qualified from a financial and a business savvy point of view, but they haven't necessarily raised their hand previously. They want to buy a franchise. So whereas most of the other lead gen sources are doing a great job of capturing people who are showing interest online. Yep. So they're searching, SEO, groups, they've shown digital interest in franchising. We're one of the only people who are proactively going out in an outbound fashion to the people who haven't raised their hand and generating that original interest and demand that is already there underneath the surface. They're thinking about changing their career path, or they're thinking about, pursuing a dream they've always had of becoming an entrepreneur, but they aren't actively searching, probably because they're busy, they're in their job, or they're just doing life. So the idea was that what I witnessed with people buying leads, as I was investigating it more, was the conversion rate was just low. It was just, you'd get people interested, but they were tire kicking because they weren't financially, like, they just weren't in a position to make that investment. And really, just we're far off from realistically owning a business. And I was like, well, if you don't go to if you avoid reaching out to those people and just wait until they're kind of like more in their mid-career or ready, a lot of the brands want that kind of mid-career person that has those soft skills developed and has a bit of a stash of means to not just, it's fine to get SBA loan and everything, but you need some operating cash and things to not be
for sure
tight from the beginning.
Yep.
And that's kind of the core premise we had, was that we'll get people that are a little more financially capable and that are business savvy enough. They understand, professionalism, and also that, like, they value taking on a proven brand and following those steps.
And is finding them, is that the secret sauce? Like, I don't want to ask anything that's kind of your secret sauce, but like, how do you find these people? Because that's the holy grail, right? In this business, is finding someone that does have the means, does have the desire, and the timing's right.
Yeah. We reach out to, a lot of people that are in the right positions in the right markets as far as their career. But honestly, the copy we use is doing a lot of the filtering. So we kind of have an authentic opening, this is who I am from the brand. But through that, we explain it, and we explain why we're reaching out and why they're special, if you will. Yep. But also that this is what we're looking for. And if it's not a fit, they won't respond. Or if they do, they'll have questions.
For any salesperson, finding a great qualified lead is, I'd probably say 70% of the deal. It's, if they're qualified and they're ready and they're looking, well, then the sales work is much, much easier. And so how do you go find those people that have the means, have the desire, and just need to understand the opportunity?
Yeah, a lot of it is tracking where they are in their career. So being at least a manager or director level in their career
Mm-hmm.
is kind of a means that separates the people who have gone out of that entry level kind of box, and they've shown enough progress that they would be closer to an entrepreneur ready to take on, a multi six figure investment in business. So
Yeah.
I would say that simple audience segmentation, along with using the copy to explain, what it is. And there's not going to be a lead source other than like brokers, as that kind of like super filters it down, because we
Sure.
want the brand to have a conversation with somebody. And sometimes they're not ready right away. It could be that they're ready 6 months, 12 months later, and they're thinking about it. But at the end of the day, you're not going to have people in the pipeline that aren't capable.
Yeah.
And that's the delineation we had, is like, we're not going to be a broker. We're not going to like filter out all the people that aren't super interested right now, but we're not going to be the lead gen that just takes every kind of like person who's flipping burgers and has a dream. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. So, what I think would be really interesting to understand or hear from you on is, so you were in franchising, worked for Which, a very successful quick service restaurant, and you did it internationally as well. And so you saw many people go into business for themselves
Mhm.
while you were helping them get into business for themselves. And then you literally went into business for yourself. So you like watched all these people that had, the guide rails and all of the benefits really that franchising offers. And there's pros and cons to every model, but then you went and started your own company. I would just love to hear, I think the listeners would love to hear too, what it was like for you to finally say, okay, I'm going to have my own thing, and how you experienced that versus kind of how you observed experiencing it with a franchise. Yeah. Like what went right, what went wrong, what was
Yeah.
the holy smokes moment? I didn't expect this. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I always had like an itch for entrepreneur. Like I had been flipping houses, had like little side businesses my whole career. So it wasn't like just out of the blue that starting a business. I had like done little things. So if you don't have that kind of like wiring to want it, your chances of failure at the first like big, huge leap you take might be higher. The difference is that I didn't really like, with my business model, I didn't have a playbook as much, because I was like, we're going to kind of break the mold of how they're doing lead gen in this business, in this industry.
Yeah.
Whereas with franchising, you are to follow a playbook and then maybe expand or modify upon it once you scale a little bit. And like, so that was maybe the difference, was like the franchisees that choose the right brands to go with, that are doing it the right way, and just follow the playbook.
Sure.
And then once you learn how to perfect what the brand teaches you, then say, okay, now I'm going to get a little creative on real estate. I'm going to bring some like, some non-traditional spaces to the brand, and see if the real estate will work with me to get like a really breakthrough location in the city or something.
Yeah.
Like, it's great to add on that creativity once you understand the foundation.
Yep.
And for me, the difference was I was going to conferences, and I was like learning what that foundation was for lead gen and marketing, because I was kind of creating a hybrid, if you will, that was like my manufacturing background. I pictured the data and the audiences like assembly lines. And it was combining these copy and these data audiences and these assembly lines to create Model T Fords. Like, it wasn't a traditional marketer mindset of like starting from like a creative point almost. So that would be the kind of difference and reason that I had to take a year to do the data model, struggle, almost fail, and then switch to lead gen and pivot to finally get something that had real serious traction in the market.
Yeah. Yeah. So if you could go back and do it again, what would you do differently?
I probably would have sat down with potential customers face to face and done nothing but interview them about what their needs were with no prior judgment. I would have done like 10 to 20 of those and just like begged and like, can I just have an hour of your time? lunch, whatever to meet with me, and just said, what's your day like? What do you really need? And then gather that information face to face with the actual customers who are franchise development salespeople and franchise consultants and brokers for us.
Yeah.
And I would have realized that they can't really use data, and that I would have pivoted to leads much earlier.
Yeah.
And not try to be so different.
And then, so how do you grow your business? How do you, and you actually did this little thing right here, which I always think of Ray Dalio, where he talks about, we learn, we fail, which gives us new learnings, which gives us more experience so we can go to the higher thing. Then we, make another mistake, and we kind of that loop theory that he has.
Looping up.
To looping up. How do you loop up? How do you grow your business?
I picture my business almost like an 50-year economic cycle compressed into like 5 years. So you just have to know where you're at. Are you in the maturity of your current model and vision, and are your systems actually breaking? And is that why you're struggling, or your people are stressing more than they were a year ago? And you have to recreate the vision? Or are you on the early slope and just be patient and let the vision ride out a little more? And then realize when that loop is happening. Because I've heard I don't know where I heard this advice, but every time you double your revenue, all your systems break.
Yeah.
Basically 90 to 100% of your systems are breaking, but you don't think of it that way when you're in the middle of it. Yep. But realizing when you have enough of stuff breaking that you need to redo your sales process a little bit, redo your back end and ops and communication flow, and grab some new tools and things to make things easier.
I've of course talked with, dozens and dozens and dozens of franchisees that we have. And, sometimes my message is as simple as, this is going to be stressful. It will be stressful. The stress you will accommodate the stress, because you'll learn that, okay, the sky is not falling. This is just part of, I've built my business to a certain level. Maybe the team that I have cannot level up with me to the next level. And so maybe I have to replace them, but that stress kind of always stays with an entrepreneur, but we learn to thrive in that stress. And I don't want to say chase that stress, because that's also that's another topic, where we will sometimes break our own business to create chaos, and that's not healthy. But those times where things start to break, that's a positive. I see that as a positive, because you're pushing the systems. But I think that stress level of knowing you have to reinvent, you have to level up every single year, because if not, somebody's lining up behind you to eat, to steal your lunch money. I mean, that's capitalism, and that's America. So you've got to always be getting better. And I would just love to hear from you, how do you lead your team? How do you get your team to level up? How do you get your systems leveled up, so that, knowing that there's always going to be that stressor on the business, which then becomes a stressor on us personally, to keep that as minimalized as possible, knowing that you can never really eliminate it?
What happens is, honestly, this is actually really how it happens.
Yeah.
I feel internal discomfort building that something's not quite right? We're growing or whatever, but why do I feel? And it every cycle, it hits me earlier, ahead of the stats are going up as a result of what we actually planned and did 6 months ago. But I'm actually trying to stay ahead of the next constraint that we're going to run into.
Yeah.
So I start feeling that discontent inside with something. And then I try to identify it by taking long walks and just clearing my head out completely and be what is it? Is it a people issue? Is it a system issue? Where is the constraint coming from? What are we going to bump into? And if I can identify it, then I just create a quick deck, to be honest. You guys, my team, we're on PD 6.0. So I just create PD 2.0, Prospect Direct PD 3.0. And I create no more than 10 slides of just here's the big things that I think we need to shift or whatever. And then I just get the team's feedback real quick. I just present it, and then I see if people are kind of tuning out on this slide. This is redundant. We already knew this. Or, yeah, you've hit on something big. And I get the whole team in the room to do it. And it happens every, used to happen every 6 months. Now it happens once a year. So the cycle times kind of go longer as you kind of grow, but and that's what I would do. And then I would test, like, okay, this is an operations idea, this is a sales idea, and I would get one-on-one with like Connie or Dave or somebody that is the stakeholder there, and refine those little areas, and then get to like a very, very simple, like 3 things that I think we need to shift.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a gut feeling. You kind of vomit out what you think could work, and then you get the feedback, and then you iterate off of that, and then simplify.
I thank you for sharing that, because that's important for people to hear. I find myself too, like life is going great, business is going great, and I have this unsettled feeling, and almost, like I'm down and I can't figure out why. Things are great. And if I finally peel that back, it's because there's an issue in the business. There's a people issue. There's a process issue, something that almost subconsciously I pushed away until I will face that. And I love you going on a long walk, meditate, whatever it is that you do, to whomever has their own ritual. But I think that's so important. I think in business, we probably personal too, we push that away when you can just stare it right in the face. One, that weird feeling goes away, because now you feel like you're empowered, feel like you're going to take power over it. And then you can actually put it into action, which helps grow your business. But I appreciate you sharing that, because it's like a weird feeling comes over you, and you don't know why until you go explore it.
Yeah. Until you run a company, you don't I never would have understood what I'm explaining right now.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's like heading a family or having kids. Like, it's one of those things where until you're responsible and you kind of like, it drills up, the buck stops with you. Like, I'm celebrating the breakthrough of a problem that my team doesn't really know, and I'm like, yes. And meanwhile, we had the worst month this month that we've had in a year and a half. And I'm like on the moon. And
Sure.
It's like, yeah. Meanwhile, we're having the best month. And I'm like, oh yeah, like made the most money ever this month. Guys, congratulations. That's good. But I was like, no emotion on my face, because for me, it already happened. Like,
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Love it. Well, last couple questions here. So one, where do you take what's the next level? What's the next thing that you're excited about for Prospect Direct?
Yeah. Like, we've built a pretty cool machine that markets and gathers original demand and attention for franchising. So continuing to refine that, there's still a lot of low-hanging fruit in how we do our messaging. And the major initiative we have right now is 10x testing. Mm-hmm. So I went to the LeadsCon conference, and I'm like, wow, these billion-dollar companies and such, they're not 10xing their testing, they're 1000xing it. Like, using AI and things, if you want to stay competitive, like, you don't deploy marketing spend until you've like tested so many versions of the creative. And that's just a fundamental shift from even a few years ago.
Sure.
What AI allows there. So embracing AI.
Yeah. How are you using, either just, the open AI format, the plugins, ChatGPT? Would love to know how you're specifically using that in the business. I think that's always fascinating, how people are using this new tool.
ChatGPT, for copywriting.
Yep.
It's, in our world, it's like, subject lines or like the headlines, and then the content itself. So content itself, I'm still a fan of humans originating, like a longer form content, and then putting it into ChatGPT to polish and give it like different prompts to see if it can like change tone and things like that. If you just give me an email, it'll have too many cliches and like, this language doesn't really hit right. For headlines and stuff like that, it's fantastic. Like, because it will think of 20 versions and then take 4 versions that are perfect and create 20 new. Like, the brain power it would take to do that stuff, and mash ideas together and create like 3-word, 4-word tidbits that are creative. Like, if you're not using it for that, like, you're using way too much of your brain unnecessarily. So specifically, we're using ChatGPT for copy, I would say, is the big thing. We don't have any like visual components to our marketing. So I would definitely be using like, I don't know, Midjourney, DALL-E, or whatever the leading ones are there. If I had a graphic or visual or video component, but we're not doing that with our market.
Do you not use visual? Because visuals can be so powerful, just so that it gets through spam filters, gets through. It's easy to digest by the reader. What's the rationale on not having very graphically colorful emails go out? Because your emails I've seen, and they're very they've got great copywriting, but they're very to the point, and they're not they're not long copy and stuff. So kind of why?
I would say 50% is probably just my own personal comfort level with copy and the fact that we've been able to increase our success and capacity. So it's like the need hasn't been there for us yet,
Sure.
the growth. But I think it's just a fundamental shift when you start doing that. You start really going more into like agency mode, because approving words on a page, like that relationship with the brands, is very simple. Like the development person can do it. You start getting into like visual representations of the brand, and like, is this in our brand guidelines? What approved images, colors? You start
Very
really
important.
getting into a highly customized area that kind of the bigger ticket agencies might be better than us at. And I'd probably have to invest and create a division of our company and do some different things to really get into that. I also fundamentally think that, what we do is we introduce a professional to a professional.
Yeah.
And when you start introducing the other visual forms, it becomes salesy. It kind of goes away from the authentic person-to-person introductions that were, prospect direct. Like,
Yeah.
that what we were built on was that simple, candid introduction that's authentic. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not close to it.
I love that you've taken a need, a pain point in the industry, in any industry, right? That's how these businesses are started, but you specifically in franchising, and you've created a solution to it. That's a great business. Anytime that you're solving a pain point, that's a great business. And we always talk here, like who's the natural customer for this? And you've literally built a business with a natural customer. Like there's just an obvious customer for that. You don't have to create a market. I love that. All right, I'm just going to ask you like 3 questions. I always kind of end every podcast with the same 3 questions. And of course, there's no wrong or right answer. This is you, and it's always kind of fun. So, 1, what is your favorite book that you've ever read? But way more importantly, how did it impact you? How did it actually change your trajectory in life? The obvious answer is a lot of times a religious text. So I always say, sans religious text.
Okay.
What's a non-religious text that literally changed the way you think and is really changed your trajectory?
The one that comes to mind is the 4 Agreements. And I think it started me on a journey of kind of creating principles of how I would direct a future business, or how I'm developing as a entrepreneur or business professional. Is that like this guy essentially created kind of 4 codes for himself, and derived them from other sources. And I realized, well, I love these 4 things that he did. I've continuously written down whenever I think of like core principles and things like that, and I continue to refine them. It's like a never-ending journey of, and like a Ray Dalio is another example, like his principles book, which I love. I think it's just like a little long, but
it's a little dry. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, he obviously has built this enormous empire from scratch and everything, that without being principles driven, I don't know how you can really do it over time.
And you said the 4 Agreements.
The 4 Agreements. Yeah. Dan Ruiz.
Okay, we'll put that in the show notes then too for the listeners. Cool, awesome. And then following that up is, and it doesn't maybe have to change your life, but what's your favorite movie and why?
This one it's kind of like music. Like you might catch me next month. I might say something different.
Sure.
But the one that I've like rewatched a few times, The Big Short. I really like that movie a lot. It shows, for me, it's like a contrarianism, and how going too far contrarian, you can really be left on an island and lonely, and it's a real big struggle. but how not being contrarian at all can lead to just like, it's a study of that.
Yeah.
And with the characters, it goes into areas that like I found really interesting.
I need to rewatch that. I watched that several years ago. And I love how they explain the derivatives and everything that's, using the blackjack table. It's a great way that they chose to explain that. And then last question is always, what question didn't I ask you that maybe you wish I did?
Oh, by the way, if I do I want to podcast and interview you too, because I'm tempted to like reverse ask some of the questions to you, but I'm like, no, I want to follow your format, like
sure,
because I am curious. But man, questions for me.
Like, what would you love for the audience to know about you and your business, or just you that we didn't talk about today?
I don't know. I think one thing interesting I sometimes explore is I was adopted, and how like parents and upbringing can be a big part of like an entrepreneur, and like so I do think that some of it is wiring, being like entrepreneur and everything, but a lot of it too is like I know the way I picture it always is like I never knew, because not having biological parents around, I never knew what my cap was supposed to be, because I never had like, well, your dad was this, so as far as I know, it's supposed to be president of the United States or a garbage man. So you just keep trying things and you kind of bust through the next level, because you don't say that like, well, I got 10% better than my parents and that's good enough.
Yeah.
Whether or not that becomes healthy, I don't know. Steve Jobs might have like, worked himself to a but he was adopted as well. So I do think there's an interesting tie that will become more, as more people become entrepreneurial. I think it's going to be a trend that won't stop as the barriers to starting new businesses. Yeah.
Were your parents entrepreneurs? Were they?
They weren't.
They weren't. Okay.
Well, actually, my dad was actually. He was a dentist, but he had operated his own business. He never scaled it past one office, but he was technically an entrepreneur.
Yeah, running your own shop. Wow, super cool. Well, where can the audience find you? Like, what's the best way to get in touch with you or to follow you?
Yeah, I don't do huge social media stuff, so it's really just prospectdirect.com.
Okay.
Alex Oswiecinski on my LinkedIn. Feel free to, and we have Prospect Direct on Instagram. So.
Okay. Okay, cool. We'll put those in the show notes as well so that people can get a hold of you. Alex, thank you so much for your time, and just love it hearing about your journey. You use the word authentic. I think talking about just some of the reach outs that you do to prospects, but I found you to be incredibly authentic today too. So I think there's a reason why your company's doing so successful and you're having such a great run. So congrats on that.
Thanks, man. Really enjoyed it.
Awesome.
Thanks so much.
Have a wonderful day. And until then, guys, remember to strive to thrive. Thank you so much for tuning into the ThriveMore podcast. Don't forget to take a look at the show notes for any resources mentioned during the show. And if you haven't already, be sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications so you have access to the latest and the greatest. I'd also like to remind you to check out our website, ThriveMoreBrands.com. There you'll find information on the brands we support and information on franchising. Thank you again for tuning in, and until next time, always remember to set your intentions for the day and strive to thrive.